So here we are. We're officially on episode dos. Episode 2. All right, today, what are we going to talk about?
Today, we're talking about the events industry as a whole, because we realized that the last episode, we kind of talked about who we are and that we're a full-service event production company, but we never talked about, what it even means to be a full-service event production company. And so we wanted to back it up a little bit and say, we're event professionals in the event industry. So what is the event industry, and how do we fit in that?
And also defining a little bit more what we mean by full service event production company, because it's a catchphrase in many ways. And so you'll probably see it on a lot of websites, but how do we define full service event production as opposed to, I don't know if there is a standard.
Right.
But
or how somebody else, at least, how
so what does that encompass?
Defines it. That's a really good point. I'd say the entire event industry is kind of subjective. There are some standards, but there's also a lot that is not really standardized, or it's like an informal standardization process. So yeah, kind of getting into that. One of those things that I want to talk about too is role titles and stuff. I don't think we'll get into that to this episode, but
we could touch on it. Let's start off by discussing the size of the events industry. It's huge,
massive.
It's massive. If you think about every time there is essentially a gathering of people, on any level, there's typically some form of event production happening.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about meetings, conferences, going to church, going to a sports arrangement, going to anything where there are other or multiple people at it. There is some aspect of event production related. So it's really is an all-encompassing huge industry.
So for this recording, I did a little quick Googles, and so in 2019, the global event industry was said to be about $1.1 trillion. That's not insignificant.
No.
The United States event industry in 2022 was estimated to be about $110 billion. So about one tenth of the global is happening in the United States. That's a huge amount. I mean, yeah, again, thinking about it, that's concerts, that's sports, that's conferences, that's networking events, that's smaller internal meetings. There are so many events happening all the time, everywhere, that this industry is just massive, and there's room in it for, I think, just so many different jobs.
Well, and I think on that front, you said that number's from 2019. All right, so fast forward, we go through COVID, and obviously that was a big, it was a big issue for most live events in the sense that you couldn't have them. But what did come from it is a lot of aspects of virtual event production. So going forward, if anything, I think that just put a little bit of gasoline on the fire for how big that industry is going to be, because now you've added this whole virtual element to reach larger audiences for these events, and just getting more value out of it. And that's essentially its own category that is very large and rapidly growing in the events world.
Yeah, and that also it's kind of creates an interesting legal dilemma that, again, we are probably not going to get into this episode, but what is broadcast versus what is live event? If you're web streaming your live event, what are the rights around that? What are the there's so much that's still kind of being hashed out now, because it used to be, if it's on TV, it's broadcast. If it's, but now it's well, mine's going to YouTube. So what are the rules around that? Nope. That's something that's evolving day to day. Also, I think a really valid thing to say here is that in the United States in 2022, the events industry brought in $110 billion. Arguably, that's still the pandemic, right? That's not even full recovered. Yeah. That's people are still not attending events because of COVID. And so we still did $110 billion as an industry. So what is it for 2023? What is it for 2024? I imagine it's even higher. So
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big industry.
And everything I see, all the reports from MPI and all the other groups, everything's saying that things are just on fire. Ever since everybody wants to meet, and just touching about the scope of the events world. I was just thinking about like just this week, like how many like business only events are there to attend. There's thousands of chamber conference meetings, luncheons. Every single hotel that's around here probably has an event going on every day. Like, so I mean, there's a lot happening in the world, and it just goes to show there's tons of room for growth, and there's already a crap ton happening. So we're diving out of the massive industry that it is. Let's kind of get into the weeds a little bit more and start discussing what are the major roles in the event industry. And if we want to start maybe from like a top down approach, as in like, okay, so if we're looking at a project, who is the key decision makers, and then start dwindling your way down from there.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to rattle these off. This is a big ask. This is just from my brain. All right. So from top down, let's talk about, I guess you're going to start with your clients. So, you're going to have an events team. So that's kind of your event designers, your event planners, your event management. Then that's going to go to like producers, who are the people on the ground making phone calls, lining things up. Then you're going to, you have your agencies who are doing the design and the creative work. After design and creative, then there's also like talent buying and for all your speakers and things like that. That's kind of like your event, like big picture event, right? Like you have your buckets of money, you have your kind of coming up with a plan. So your event planners and everything around that. Then you get into your like facilitators. So you have people like us, event production companies, audiovisual companies, scenic fabricators, technical directors or technical direction companies, technical design companies. I would argue that we are also a technical design company.
Catering.
Oh gosh. Well,
even before
then. So there's the full service like we do, and then you have your specialists. So you can have a rigging specialist, you can have lighting specialists, audio specialists, video specialists, event engineering. We work with engineering firms to get all of our designs stamped to say, hey, this is safe. Then you go to your catering, your food. Food's huge. We don't really touch a lot of that, but like that's a huge part of the industry. Party rentals, so tables, chairs, linens. Then you have your decor, so your fancy furniture. That's your court party rentals of the world. Tent rentals. Oh gosh, I didn't even think about tent rentals. And event infrastructure in general, bike rack, generators, ground covering, fences, all of those things, right? And then, so catering, decor, floral arrangements. I mean, weddings, again, we don't really touch the wedding industry, but even in corporate events and the events we do, we definitely deal with floral and plants and things like that.
Graphics, big one too.
Graphics, printing, printing and fabrication for that matter. Printing's huge. Graphic design, so more in the digital world, but like creating content for screens, especially in the world we live in where it's custom screen sizes. So you got to make custom graphics for that. We just did a show where an entire keynote presentation was in 3:1 rather than, standard TV is a 16:9, but we had a 3:1 screen. So we built content to that.
So I think let's dive a little bit in on, let's say, where we fit in as a full service event agency. And let's talk about maybe like the types of projects that is really suited for in our scenario. And then later on, we can kind of talk about for larger or specialty projects, how we plug into teams when we're not necessarily controlling every aspect of it. So like, go ahead and let's start with like, what does being a full service provider mean for Legion?
So for Legion, that means that we take responsibility for every aspect of the event production. So we're not going to do your hotel booking. We're not going to do, your catering, but we are anything that has to do with physically putting the event on. So if, getting tents, we're going to help line those up as a production partner there, as infrastructure, generators, audio equipment, lighting equipment, video equipment. We're going to provide all of the equipment. We're going to staff all the positions to operate that equipment. Staging, we own a lot of staging in house, so we're going to provide the staging. So basically, every piece that's needed to build the event itself. That's
physical.
Build the physical space, the structures,
and technology needed for it to be an
Yep.
event that is speaking to X amount of people,
Right.
and achieving whatever ambiance
Yep.
that's based on the technical side, not like decor pieces and all that. We're talking lighting,
not decor exactly. So
lighting elements and things to achieve that,
and scenic to a degree, right? So we do some custom scenic in house. We have partners who we have build much larger things if we can't support it in house, but that would still, I'd say, like, whether or not we do it in house, which 90% of it we do, we'll still take responsibility to get that thing done, right? So we'll say, hey, you need, if you need some giant custom scenic piece that we can't build, we're going to take responsibility to hire out the company that needs to do it and make sure it gets done to the specs that it needs to, and it will interact with everything else in the space properly.
Well, and we have a number of vendors that we worked with in the past and built up that book of people that we work hand in hand with, because a lot of times it's not like there's just a floating scenic element, right? It's scenic that's interacting with a lot of different technical elements.
Exactly.
Or technical elements are mounting to it, or there's a million different things like that. So having those scenic vendors that are working hand in hand with the AV providers is extremely helpful. When you get on site, that your ducks are in a row and everything should line up and plug in together. And just having those partnerships already set up just makes that process much simpler, and you have a lot more confidence in what you're able to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why smaller scenic things we absolutely do in house, because that way we can, build it in our shop here. That's why we have Mod Trust, it's behind us, so we can build it, test it, make sure it fits. If we don't, we have partners. We have Astound out of Las Vegas. We have Made First in LA, and Nashville. We have wonderful scenic partners who we work with who, not only do they, make time to do the testing and the fitting, we've, taken things to LA, we've taken things to Las Vegas to get them fitted to make sure it's correct. But they'll also, be ready to adjust on site if needed. So definitely can, have a great network and leverage that to make sure that, again, we're taking responsibility. So we're going to make sure it's done properly. So we have a vetted list of companies we use that we trust, and if we trust them, then I would say our clients can trust them.
And I think these are they're maybe not the bread and butter. That's just showing when we're talking about full service. Essentially, we're taking on, for us, it goes outside of just providing the sound, lighting, staging. All those things are kind of requirements. But when we look at it, if you're telling us you need help finding a tent or whatever it is, we're diving into that too, and we have thoughts and different preferred items that we want in that area. So when you look at it, I think one easier way maybe to kind of focus in from a very simple point would be, all right, so if we're looking at a ballroom, if you're coming in, you're being hired to do full production service in a standard ballroom at any Marriott or wherever, kind of what are those core services, and how is being full service a benefit in that scenario?
Yeah. So, I think you take full service, to me, means that we own the equipment. We have the staffing, but then on top of that, we also have event producers. So I'd say you are an event producer, because anything that we don't have or anything we need to coordinate. So if you're going into a ballroom, more than likely in-house is going to have an exclusive on the power and on the rigging. And so if we're going to do any rigging, which we almost certainly are, that means we're coordinating with them. So that's us taking that coordination. We can take that off of the event planner's plate. They don't have to worry about that. We're going to, of course, be in communication with them to make sure that, hey, this is what we're getting at for quotes. This is what we expect it to cost. We're going to try to be as cost effective as possible, and reduce, I'd say in general, we kind of try to do as little rigging as possible, just to keep that cost down, because it can be pretty extensive. So we're going to manage the budget. We're going to coordinate with the in-house AV, and then we're going to obviously coordinate all of our pieces. So our trucking and all that, that's all handled by us. And then we're going to bring in our staging, our technology equipment, so our lighting, audio, sound, video, lighting, audio, sound, lighting, audio, video. And produce the event, and then we're going to staff the event. So we'll have show callers, technical directors, audio engineers, video engineers, lighting designers, and go through that whole process, and and then execute the event as required. The other piece of this that we haven't really gotten into is like pre-production and event design. We do full 3D renderings of just about every event we do. I mean, we do some smaller political things and stuff that don't require renderings, but any show in a ballroom is going to get a 3D rendering. And that's something we can show to our client, say, hey, this is what we're thinking. We also do all of the pre-production. So that means production schedules, crew scheduling, logistics, hotel booking, all of those things that we then share with our client as well, so they can kind of see a breakdown of how it's going to go.
I think just to touch on one point on that, the doing the diagrams and all of that pre-production work is a huge asset, especially because there are certain times that we have to use local labor, or like what can I think? Union IATSE labor. And a lot of times we choose to use them just because it makes more sense, especially if we're traveling. But with that, to maintain the same level of quality, doing those diagrams, having all those pre-production documents, and having that be something that we can show people who are not necessarily a core part of our team significantly helps us on sites when we are dealing with, a large portion of the team not being in-house.
Yeah.
And so that's like taking that full service
labor
and,
coordination is
and making it be applicable to scenarios where you don't have full control. And a lot of times,
a lot of times you don't. Right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, it's not economically viable for me to fly out 20 people to do an event, right? Like, especially if they're event techs, or that, not the highest quality, not quality, that's the wrong word, highest tier technician. Like, you should get that locally. Like, you shouldn't be flying out 20 people. You should be leaning on local labor for that. And yeah, it's having a 3D rendering is very helpful, because you can hold up your picture of your 3D rendering and then look, and does it look the same? No? Okay, then we're going to adjust until it does. So yeah, very, very helpful. So I'd say to wrap that up, it is taking responsibility for the entire event production. So all of the build pieces, and then also having a producer. So say our event client comes to us and says, hey, there was an issue. We're short 30 couches. We have somebody on staff who's ready to start calling every single furniture company in the area to find 30 couches, so we are, not only are we doing all the AV and doing the build, but we also have somebody on staff, an event producer, who is very knowledgeable in that type of thing, like coordinating furniture, coordinating pieces to come in when something goes wrong, or there's an addition, or there's changes. We have the ability to jump in and help there as well.
Let's talk about times where it's not possible to be the full service provider, and like discuss how you plug in there.
Yep. And I think we can tie that into this. It's the same thing as taking responsibility, right? So, so I would define full service event production, like what we say our company is, right? We're a full service event production company, is that we take responsibility for every aspect of the build that's happening. So we're doing the staging, we're doing the lighting, we're doing the audio, we're doing the video, we're doing the drapery and the scenic pieces. We're going, we do a lot of scenic fabrication in-house. If we're not doing it in-house, we have some trusted partners we lean on. But again, we're taking responsibility for all of those pieces. Things we don't do, I would say typically, is like, we don't source the furniture. We'll do staged furniture, but we're not going to, if you're going to bring in, 100 couches, we're not going to do that. It just doesn't make sense. And then, so we're going to take responsibility, again, event infrastructure. So ground cover, fencing, bike rack, things like that. So anything that has to do with building the event, we're going to take responsibility for that. Again, things we're not going to do. We're not going to do furniture, most likely. We're not going to do like hotel bookings. We're not going to do for attendees. We're not going to do, travel booking for attendees or things like that. Ticketing, that's kind of the event producers and event planners. And that's why we work really well hand in hand with them.
To I know you discuss a lot of like physical build portions, but dive in on like content management and like run a show
Oh,
portions
okay.
too.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. So there's also pre-production. So we do a lot of pre-production on most of our shows. You know, kind of there's a threshold, but most of our shows are going to have a production schedule. They're going to have CAD drawings, 3D renderings. We're going to. You just said something else. What was it?
Run a show.
Run a show. Yeah, we're going to build a run a show. Oh, content. A lot of these shows that we do need content made for them. So whether that's video, like going out and shooting ahead of time and creating content, creating videos for the event, we can do that. We do that a lot. We also do graphic design and motion graphics and things like that, because if we're building a custom size screen, we will need some custom graphics to go on it. So we do those things as well. So I guess that's full service to me. So some event planners or freelance technical directors, they will kind of, rather than having a full service company like us take responsibility for all those things, they'll piecemeal that out. So they'll have an audio vendor who's an audio specialist. They'll have a lighting specialist. They'll have a video specialist, on-site TV. They'll have, they'll bring in companies who are excellent at what they're doing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And then, basically the technical director will be the conductor of these different pieces to make it all work well together. That can be a little bit more challenging because, as I'd say, with us having it under one house, we're one team working towards one goal. Sometimes when you do things like that, you can get like your video will want it one way, your audio team will want it another way. Video ran their cables like shit, and then lighting's, they're just like internal arguments. Again, there also are companies who are, I'd say most lighting specialists will have their, hey, we work really well with this video company. We work really well with this audio company. So like, you can absolutely do it that way. It's just, there's pros and cons to both ways. Right.
And so like discussing that, obviously it's not always the case of you can do it full service. And there are many times we're working with partner companies where there's either vendors that are already associated on the project, or it's just a massive build where it needs to be parsed out, or that, like logistically, sometimes it makes more sense to use a local company, depending on like if it was a large stage or not that's in New York. Obviously that doesn't terribly make sense. But so if it's something like that, how do you plug in typically, like you taking on the TD role in like some specialty version?
Yeah, so that's kind of like we did for Ecolab 100 last year. So Legion came in as technical designers, as technical directors, and then as, you could almost say production coordinators. So they do their annual conference. We produced that fully in-house. That was all Legion. But then we also produced their 100-year anniversary party, which we just do not have the capacity to A, do the 100-year anniversary party on its own. It was huge. And B, certainly not do both of those things at the same time. So what we did is we brought in a management team to help we selected the vendors. So we brought in lighting and production company and scenic vendors and furniture vendors. So we helped manage all of that. We did all of the pre-production for that. We had a very in-depth production schedule that was, we had a document that was probably, 100 pages long.
More.
We had 3D CADs of the entire football field. So we definitely can wear that hat as well. That's why I'd say we come in as, technical director or production manager or, event lead. There's a million names, I guess, for it.
Yeah.
And manage, I guess it's an event management, right? We can come in and manage the entire project from the top down. So we do that as well. Yeah.
Real quick, can you button up the ideal clientele based on those needs? Like, what are, just name off a few different like quick hits of who you're typically working with.
So I'd say we're typically working for Fortune 50 to Fortune 500 clients that are producing events from 250 to 2,000 people. Sometimes there's an event management company involved there. So sometimes it'll be, say Google will hire an event management company, and then that event management company will hire us, or sometimes it'll be direct. But typically it's kind of that space. So it might be a creative agency, it might be an event management company, or it might be direct to client. But that I'd say is like our kind of our bread and butter of client is professional speaking engagement from 250, the very high end, to 2,000 to 4,000.
Well, I think like part of the full service mentality, like even when we are not necessarily, even when we're partnered with other vendors, is that like at the end of the day, all of us have to be successful for any one of us to be successful, right? So like that, I guess it's a mindset thing for me, is like that even though I might just be doing the audio, like I need to know that everything else is going to go well on there, or else we're going to have a shitty, crappy, like it's going to hit the fan, So like that mindset of caring about the overall production and like taking the steps to make sure all of your bases are covered, and like doing all those things, like checking in, like I was talking about the tent, you brought up the tent. That stuff, it has to go well. If the event fails, that's not good for anyone.
Right. if any aspect of the event fails, that's not good for anyone, because essentially it is, can be seen as the overall event failing.
I mean, like we said at the beginning of this podcast, this is honestly just a massive industry. We barely scratched the surface. And we really tried to focus in on just kind of where we've ended up in our niche. And so I hope it was helpful for you. And if you're just starting out, understanding, kind of where you could fit in this equation. Like I said, it's the possibilities are endless. And on that front, for me, I mean, I'd love to hear back. I've been diving a lot more into, sustainability in events. I know it's trending this year. So anybody doing cool stuff there, I'd love to hear more about. I think, we've worked with the bicycle generator folks and things like that. I think about that as like a very specific niche in the events industry that's really cool. So like, it doesn't have to just be like your typical A1, V1. There's a lot of cool things that are kind of outside the box. So I'd love to hear more about those things.
Event innovation
in the
green space.
Obscure event innovation.
Yeah.
That's really what gets me going.
I like that. And that, again, that's the, if you have your system stuff locked down, you can start thinking about like, what's a cool thing? That's the innovation. So
I agree.
Totally. Well, again, thanks everybody for listening and watching, and see you on the next one.
Yep.